Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Automation Unchained, a holistic approach to enterprise automation. My name is David Goodstein, and I'm a webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute and Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence. It is our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with Everest Group and EdgeVerve. We encourage you at any time to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, please click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click the submit button. We will also be doing a few polling questions, so we ask that you please choose from the options provided. Today's webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the recorded webinar. It will also be available on our website at irpaai.com. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Frank Casal. Frank?
Great, thanks, David, and thanks to you and Molly for helping to produce this webinar. We have a really interesting segment today. I'll start off by telling you what we're not doing. This will not be a high-level industry trends thing. It's less about what is RPA. This is really less of that, although a good portion of what we had done for the past maybe 3 or 4 years or so is about definitions and trends and things like that. What more and more of you have come to us for is very much practical, tactical advice, roadmap, if you will. And what we're doing here today, the next hour, is just that. This is really about real-world how-to and best practices with regard to engagement with service providers. What kind of roadmap should you have? If you're listening to me now, you're either likely one of 2 categories. You're either a starter or what we would define as a scaler. Starter meaning you're looking to do this for the first time and you want to get a sense of how to go about it in a reasonable and efficient way. Probably at least half of you on this call are what we would define as scalers, meaning you've been dabbling maybe the past year or 2 or 3, and now you're really looking to scale and you want to make sure you do this the right way. Maybe experience to date, a couple things worked, and maybe you tripped up a few times. So we're fortunate here today to have leading experts from Everest and EdgeVerve join us. But before we dive into the good stuff, I believe, David, we have just maybe, or Sarah, 1 or 2 quick introductory slides. If we can flip to the next slide, I'll make sure we do this quickly. Most of you on the call are members already, but as with most of our webinars, many are not. So if you're not familiar with us, here's who we are. I founded the organization just about 4 years ago. And as I did 20 some odd years ago with outsourcing, when I launched the Outsourcing Institute, once again, we felt that this would be a critical wave. We felt that there'd be a need for an ecosystem and a place where folks could come to learn, connect, network, whether you're a buyer, advisor, service provider, attorney in the space. We have over 8,000 members to date globally, large, medium, and small companies. I look forward to hitting the 10,000 mark so we could just celebrate, just one more good reason to celebrate. So that's it for that slide. Next slide, please. Super. So here's who we are and what we look like, or at least what our photo looks like. So there you see me, nice and tan from the summer. Robin George will be presenting shortly after Sarah. Robin is AVP Business Development from EdgeVerve. EdgeVerve is our sponsor here today, so thank you to the EdgeVerve team for making this possible. Sarah Burnett, many of you may know, is a VP with the Everest Group. Everest Group is a long-time known and respected advisor and analyst in this space, and Sarah will be sharing her perspective, insights with regard to a holistic approach as well. Now, one thing I want to mention is, we typically actually take questions during and answer them during the presentation. We have a lot to cover, so I encourage you to submit your questions. As David mentioned at the beginning, submit them as they come to mind, so you don't have to remember them all, but realize that we'll queue them up and get to them on the back end. So David, do we have a poll question next before we kick off with the content?
Yes, that's right.
Let's see how prepped I am. Sarah, so somebody has to hit a button. There we go. So here's the question. what's top of your vendor selection criteria when it comes to automation? So what are you looking for? Is it price? Is it expertise, in your industry? Is it references? Is it really based on an existing relationship, an organization you've been working with for many years? Or how important is flexibility? Please select one. If you could do that now, and then we could see what the results are together. Okay, so very interesting. Maybe not too much of a surprise for me, but vertical expertise, clearly the leader of the list. And I guess right behind that is, do I have this right? Yes, client references. Okay, no surprise. We'll make sure to address each of these throughout the discussion, but I appreciate all of your participation here. So without much further ado, let me pass it over to you, Sarah. And again, thank you for your help and support today.
Thank you, Frank. I'm delighted to be here working with you on this webinar, and hello, ladies and gentlemen. Just so that you know what I'm going to talk about, let me just tell you that there'll be 3 sections to my presentation. Firstly, I'm going to give you an introduction. Basically, this is about definitions that we use at Everest Group, so we're all on the same page. And so when you hear some of the terms that I use, you'll know what I'm talking about. And then I'll be talking about automation sourcing models, the kind of things that we're seeing organizations use, and then we'll go on to the buyer services selection criteria. And the results of the poll that Frank just did is very interesting, and I think you'll see that it'll tie in to the buyer selection criteria that I'll be sharing with you as well. So let me begin by going onto the introduction section. And firstly, I just wanted to share with you the term that I'll be using probably a bit too often on this call, and that is service delivery automation, SDA for short. That's Everest Group's all-encompassing term for technologies that are used for automating processes. I've highlighted a few of those here on the slide, on the left side of the slide in the column that starts with robotic desktop automation. And that, of course, is something that's been around for a long time. It's about enabling better productivity for the workforce. It's often partial assisted automation and works with structured data. You know what you're going to get with it, and typically is triggered by a worker or as a result of the worker basically pressing a button or something like that to set it off. Then we come to robotic process automation, which is the big, very exciting area in this field. And the difference here, as we recognize it, is that it enables that digital workforce because basically the robots become the part of the workforce, and they run on servers that can be in a data center, running in lights out mode and operating end to end. They can be orchestrated through scheduling and queuing. They could be interacting with workflow processes. And RPA also deals with structured and semi-structured data, and you know what you're going to get with it because it's rules-based. Then we go into various shades of smarter automation, autonomic, which again can handle more complex rules and have some kind of expertise, and expert systems really come into this, into the sort of loftier titled artificial intelligence, the narrow area of artificial intelligence. And we call it narrow because what we see in this market are tools that deal with specific requirements. So they have narrow applications such as voice recognition, natural language processing, computer vision, and so on. When we get to the technology level of development, where all these things are present in a artificial being, a robot of some kind, then we sort of be getting to general artificial intelligence, which is really for us at the moment, we see that as future technology. So just to give you a description of what we believe to be available in the market at the moment. Although artificial intelligence is a very hot topic when it comes to global services, it's still really RPA that is the hottest technology. Most organizations are still at the early stages of adopting it. So there's still many years of RPA deployments to come. And the reason that it's so popular is the high value and low risk characteristics of it. I won't talk through this slide too much because, as Frank said, many of you already know the benefits. But just wanted to highlight that beyond cost reduction, other factors to consider when building the business case for RPA include process optimization and improving customer experience. I mean, really aiming to increase the top line of your organizations with RPA. Then we go to the lower part of the picture, the low risk aspect of it, the fact that it's non-invasive and it's easy to roll out. It's relatively easy to roll out, and you can roll it back as well should things go wrong. You can always fall back onto doing the processes the way that you've always done without really causing any kind of disruption if something goes wrong. So let's move on to automation sourcing models. So what are organizations doing about this? And I've got a set of build slides here. I'm going to start by the simplest one, which is where companies basically decide to buy the technology direct from a technology vendor, and then they implement it themselves. So a direct relationship between the buyer and the automation technology vendor. And you might see, it's really not unusual, in fact, to see that there is some consulting going at the beginning of this. So some consulting services might come in. Organizations tend to talk to analysts and advisors and consulting firms to work out what they need to do to have that early stage education and then some degree of strategic planning and decision making. So that's the direct relationship. Another way of doing it is to go through your service provider. Some organizations many organizations in fact already have relationships with outsourcing service providers. So they might very well ask an existing provider or a new provider, depending on what they want automated, to work with them. And so what we might see is that, first of all, the service provider is asked to automate more of an existing set of services that they're delivering, or automate something new. And the other thing to note here is that many service providers, as is the case with EdgeVerve and Infosys, offer their own technology as well. So in this case, in this scenario, you might very well have service provider and the technology vendor being one and the same. Then we get the case of organizations going through a system integrator as the lead contractor. So you might see the system integrator basically doing some of that early consulting, some of that early education and awareness and strategic planning, and moving into actually developing the robot and going on to running as well, running the automation services as well. And typically they work with a number of partners, the technology vendor arena. And so there's always, you'll see that to the right, there's always a relationship with the technology vendor between the buyer and the technology vendor. And this is because of the support and bug fix and those kind of relationships that organizations typically have with their technology vendors. So that's the three most common options for sourcing automation. I forgot to mention that, of course, service providers can continue to deliver services through a managed service. So they can run a particular process and also maintain the robot. So we see these kind of opportunities for ongoing relationship. between buyers and service providers. And indeed, with system integrators, some of them do things like manage the center of excellence or manage the operations room, the control tower control room that manages the robot. So just to reiterate that all these aspects could be preceded by the buyer getting consultancy from different organizations, analysts, advisors, system integrators, and specialist professional services providers. You could also see that at each stage of scaling up automation, organizations would go through these processes again. So you could have, go through the consulting, deployment, running, and maintenance cycles for different requirements at different times. It's not unusual to see in large organizations where they have gone for a number of different projects for automating processes that you might have a major system integrator working with several service providers or vice versa. And so you might see that the buyer is actually using very many different technologies. They've got specialist providers for those or process-specific related areas. So you could have, even in one department, in the finance department, you could have some aspects being run by one service provider, other aspects being run by a system integrator, or indeed by the organization itself internally. So there are all kinds of patterns that could occur in the sourcing, when sourcing automation. One of the questions that we get very frequently is about relationships with existing outsourcing services providers. And I just wanted to cover to give you some ideas about the kind of things that we see. First of all, if you've got an existing relationship, the most common option to go for is incremental, so incrementally increasing automation within the service that is being provided. And the benefit of this is that it allows the organization to go through change in an ordered manner, and often it's to do with how you change the contract, the terms of the contract, so going from input-based, FTE-based pricing models to possibly transaction-based pricing models. So it's about managing that change and doing it incrementally within the scope of the contract. So typically what you will see is that the level of effort, manual effort, is reduced, and as more automation is introduced into the contract, it's not unusual for those FTEs that are released to then go on and for the scope to be extended, so the FTEs then deliver additional services as well. So that can happen as well. The second model is transformational. Really, this is more of a big bang approach, and of course, it requires more work. It's more of a change management story here, a bigger change management story here. So it's about really changing the way that the pricing is done, more focused on outputs and outcomes. You would have to do quite a bit of baselining at what you have, so that you can then measure what outcomes have been achieved, what benefits have been realized, so that you can then work out the allocation of those kind of benefits and some of the gain sharing aspects that might come in. It's ideal for very transactional processes. If you've got that kind of relationship, the relationship is about transactional processes. Okay, so now we move into the buyer's services selection criteria. So just to sort of give you a summary of this, typically what we see is organizations creating a list of potential suppliers, and with that, they will then look at the options such as the pricing that they get from the supplier, typical delivery capabilities. They look at subject matter expertise, which came up in the poll that we did just now. So subject matter expertise, this might be the vertical aspects, or it might be processes such as finance and accounting. Very often we hear that's an area that a lot of work goes into by the buyer of the service. Track record of automation projects, industry or geographic presence and skills, and not to forget partnerships as well, because those also matter. So let's look at some of these in more detail. Firstly, pricing and timelines. I think really that goes without saying. The most efficient kind of cost pricing model, of course, always is a favorite with buyers, and the fact that the service provider can deliver the services within a reasonable time frame is always an important consideration. Then we go into the sort of more generic consulting expertise, because this does matter, looking at what kind of methodologies and frameworks the organization has, and having experience based on these methodologies and frameworks always helps boost the quality of the outcomes as well. Then there is RPA specific expertise. This is something that at the moment is still hard to find. That RPA is still a relatively new group of technologies, and so skills are still very highly in demand and in short supply. But I have to say that it's not really like heavy, incredibly detailed, technical, heavy coding, because RPA, most of the technologies on the market offer visual basic style of coding with drag and drop capabilities, pre-built libraries, libraries with modules that handle many of the different actions that the robot would have to take, from simple logins to identifying text in PDF documents. So it's not terribly difficult coding, and it really, organizations should look at the capabilities of the coders and their experience, having a logical mind and being able to pick up new languages, so to speak. That's really the more important aspect of having RPA expertise. But of course, there's been a lot of training going on, and a lot of technology vendors have introduced certification for their partners. And this is where familiarity with specific sets of technologies could be an advantage, particularly if the expertise has sort of resulted in certification as well. The quality of project personnel really is sort of tied into the previous categories, having people with experience of delivering projects and the technology, of course, as well. And then we get into the process expertise. So I mentioned earlier that one of the questions that we often, or one of the challenges that organizations tell us they face, is having to tell their coders about the business context many times over and over again. And this is quite time consuming and can be quite expensive for organizations. So having process expertise, say, of finance and accounting or HR or procurement, and having someone with that expertise in the team would help greatly as well. So going on to the next set of requirements, typically the selection criteria includes client references. That came up as the high requirement, important requirement in the poll just now. You have to bear in mind that although there are many deployments already going on of RPA, client references are always a bit difficult to get, because not all clients are willing to talk about their project. And there aren't, RPA being relatively new, is, there aren't that many clients yet, although, you'll find that some organizations have already, some providers have already notched up quite a few and can come to you with good client references as well. Industry and geography, we mentioned vertical expertise. So in fact, some of the research that we've done shows that industry-specific processes are the ones that are most commonly automated. So by that, I mean processes such as banking, loan processing, insurance, claims processing. Those kind of processes are being automated the most, followed by customer contact, and then finance and accounting. So having knowledge of industry-specific requirements is very, very valuable in this kind of selection criteria. And then geographic-specific requirements, understanding that data formats are different in different geographies for multinationals, understanding the sort of year-end dates, for calendar years, etc. Those kind of things are all very important. Languages as well, spoken languages. So, having to automate things maybe in Far Eastern languages as well as in Western European languages. Those kind of experiences would be very helpful. Partnerships, very important. We've already mentioned the fact that typically partnerships with technology vendors shows knowledge of the technology, and certification shows the degree to which that knowledge has been extended. And of course, if you work with service providers that have their own technologies, then that's a different matter, but you might see deployment partnerships or expertise brought in for areas such as those industry-specific, the vertical knowledge that might be needed. And then we go into the ability to commit to outcomes or outputs. So what we're seeing is the slight uptick in buyers actually wanting some kind, the provider to actually have some skin in the game, pricing structure. So we're getting to that outcome related payments and gain sharing. Those kind of things are starting to have this kind of uptick as well. So that brings me to my last slide, just to summarize then. The benefits of SDA basically continue to drive adoption. We're estimating by 2019, it could well be over $1 billion. The market for RPA could well be over $1 billion. So it's still a very small market, but it's growing extremely fast. There are many different ways to source automation, and there are different models, and within each model there are all kinds of combinations of service providers, consulting providers, and professional services providers that can work together, as well as in-house models. Once automated, there are various managed services options, as well as running things in-house, and there could be parts of the operations that are outsourced. We're seeing a good deal of sort of centers of excellence being outsourced or contracted out to providers. We believe there are two major models for automating more of outsourced services, existing outsourced services. So there's the incremental approach, ideal for where the volumes vary a good deal and maybe there isn't a stable baseline to measure for future reference, or the big bang approach, which requires a significant level of change. It's really about transforming services and then building the measurement criteria so that you can then allocate charges, etc., and have the appropriate pricing for that. Buyer criteria for selecting automation services includes pricing, expertise, the vertical aspects, geographic aspects as well. That brings me to the end of my presentations. If you wanted to follow me, there's some contact information on that slide. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening. And Frank, back over to you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I believe we have another poll, and again, there is your contact information. I encourage all to contact you. Your contact information will be provided post-webinar as well. So, David, I believe we have another, there you go. So here's the second and final polling question. Which do you think is the best strategy for bot development, right? Do you want to develop it in-house, outsource to a single vendor, or choose different product implementation partners, maybe best in class, if you will, or technology specific. So there are your three choices. Please select one, and let's see how we do. Aha. That's what I predicted, but it's always easy to say afterwards, right? So leader of the pack here is choosing different. That's a lot of what we're seeing within our membership. And right behind that is in-house. Yeah, we don't see too many folks kind of betting on any one horse, especially as Sarah mentioned that, we're still early in the game here, very fluid market. All right, so with that, let's pass the microphone, the virtual microphone, to Robin. Robin, if you're ready, look forward to hearing what you have to say. And thanks again for supporting us with this by sponsoring this webinar.
Thank you, Frank. Hello, everybody. Sarah, if you could move to the next slide. David, can you?
Yeah. David, if you could help, it's having trouble getting rid of that polling slide.
Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah, so we've heard from Sarah, and for the next 10-15 minutes, while Sarah spoke about the right sourcing model, the right partner, I just want to focus on the right set of competencies and capabilities to ensure a successful RPA program. Sarah, if you could move to the next slide, please. So I have laid out the 6 key dimensions and leading questions which are important for establishing, setting up, and running an RPA program. So while the RPA timelines and the cost of an RPA program may be much lesser than a typical ERP or a CRM program, it really needs to be treated as a strategic transformation program, right? So the first dimension to be addressed is the strategy for automation and how the overall robotic automation strategy fits into the organization strategy, right? So we need to define the KPIs for success, and it would be very lazy, a lazy attempt if cost was the only KPI that is really being measured and tracked, and you miss a chance to impact, the top line revenue, the quality, compliance, and the customer experience, and transform all of these parameters really as part of the robotic automation strategy. The second one is governance. Once the strategy in place, you need to look at really what is the governance that is required. You need a governance that is practical, that really is in line with the robotic automation vision of making quick gains and not really waiting 18 months to see your first set of gains in automation. There will be debates around this. Should it be IT led? Should it be business led? And in my view, unless it's a few POCs that you're doing, what you really need is a strong cross-functional team of IT, business, security, operations to really make this a viable program. The next one is key, is people enablement, and not just enablement, but engagement. It's really important to engage people, early on in the program to dispel some of the apprehensions, misconceptions around robotic automation. I think the strategy and the governance needs to be really communicated well, get the people to buy into, the whole strategy. And also, you need to enable people to play different roles in the automation program, or even look at, other areas that they can move into to be reskilled and contribute to other parts of the organization. The next one is the technology. There comes the choice of the product. There comes the choice of hosting. Do you want to go with a single vendor, multiple vendor? I think we had a sort of a poll around that, and you may want to go with multiple vendors for best-in-class solutions around robotic automation. The next one is really how do you operationalize the center of excellence, this cross-functional team that you have created to really deliver the outcomes of the RPA program, right? What methodology do you follow? Do you insource? Do you outsource? Do you really do the development in an agile way, or do you follow your typical IT release model and make the whole program into another IT program? So these are the kind of questions that you really need to think about when you think about the operating model, and really how the virtual FTE and the real FTE will work together in your operations team, and how will you manage fallouts, etc. Right? And the last one, the long haul, really the entire process of developing bots, deploying bots, and managing bots, and also how do you keep tracking the KPIs and business benefits that you're realizing from the program, and then finally feeding back into the whole into the other dimensions really of strategy, governance, people enablement, and to make any changes and modifications as necessary. So really we see this as the 6 key dimensions that an organization needs to address, and Infosys and EdgeVerve is really helping our clients in all of these dimensions in various capacities. Sarah, if you could move to the next slide. Now, when it comes to the technology, the product capabilities itself, I just want to highlight what the Infosys EdgeVerve offering is all around. So the first module or the first capability is integrated device monitoring. And what we have often seen is that most organizations know a few processes which are in their face and which are right candidates for automation. But post that, coming out with an exhaustive list of candidates for automation is often a challenge. And why is it a challenge? The challenge could be because processes are not documented, or they are outsourced to a third party, and you've lost track of the process itself. It may so happen that the processes are documented, but what's documented and what's really being performed on the ground is completely different, is completely different. And therefore, it makes it difficult to really come out with the right set of automation processes for automation, the right business case. What IDM, the capability does that is that it enables an organization to monitor and track a process as it is being executed by the user, by the operations user, while being fully compliant to regulations and security requirements of an organization. So it really gives you a clear view of the process as it's being executed, the steps involved, the applications involved, the manual activities, the time taken by different activities, and the variations in the process that are being executed across your operations, right? And this gives you a good basis on which to base your automation decisions on, to base and come up with a solid business case, right? So the first capability of the first module is integrated device monitoring, and in a nutshell, it gives you really the right data to base on the basis of which you figure out which are the processes that will benefit from robotic automation. Sarah, next, please. The next module is the robotic process automation. Now, this is, as Sarah mentioned, the hot capability in the market. This module enables you to really configure, deploy, and manage the robots. The processes can be either configured by programming, by example, or recording, or using a studio. There is a control tower that really enables you, which is a cockpit, and gives you complete control of the processes, the bots as they are being executed. And so you are aware of what each bot is doing, how many transactions have been processed, which transactions have failed. You can drill down into those transactions. You can look back into the history of how the bot has performed, or how a particular process has performed across a time period. And we also have a bot store, which basically is a concept that enables you to really maximize the reuse of whatever bots or microbots that you're developing. And this is particularly useful when there are multiple departments doing automation, or the automation is spread across geographies, as in the case of multinational companies. Next one, please, Sarah. The smart user environment is the attended automation or the robotic desktop automation. Very valuable because all processes in an organization cannot be fully automated. There will be processes that require the human touch, and this gives the human the capability of attended automation on demand, of automated searches, updates, and really even in the case of robotic fallouts, this is the capability that enables the agent to quickly pick up on a fallout, get all the data related to that particular transaction, and quickly process the transaction, right? Next one, please, Sarah. The real-time expertise manager is really all about looking at all the channels and how automation can benefit each and every channel, right? So if you take, for an example, an email as a channel, right? An email coming into a center should be fully automated in terms of either response to that email that has come into the center, or in terms of auto allocation if it's a complex query that cannot be directly responded by a bot. And the entire management of that email till the customer signs off or says that, yes, I'm satisfied with the response, is something that real-time expertise manager is able to do. Next one, please, Sarah. And finally, as Sarah mentioned, the general artificial intelligence capability is something that we offer to the market, and this is the area that once the deterministic processes have been automated, most of our clients are looking forward to probabilistic and predictive automation, and this is the brain that really enables us to offer those capabilities to our clients and increase the potential of automation beyond what is possible through deterministic automation. Next slide, please, Sarah. The last slide, very quickly, there are a lot of robotic automation products and services organizations out there. How do we differentiate ourselves? The first one is our vision of end-to-end offerings. It's not just about robotic process automation, RPA, but also about robotic desktop automation, about channel automation, and about general artificial intelligence. The second is the expertise, and again, I think the polls and what Sarah covered this. It's just not about the technology to automate, but also the whole process consulting, the domain consulting that goes along with it. How do you set up a viable enterprise-wide center of excellence for an organization? And also, if you want to execute a large-scale RPA program, really the resources that are required in that scale to really enable that program is something that we are focused on. When it comes to architecture, I think non-invasive is the name of the game. We are also looking at Citrix-compatible multi-skilled robots. And one key aspect that we are focused on is how to reduce the infra footprint so that you don't really need a virtual machine for each robot. And in fact, it should be a 1:20 or even higher than that. And so that's another important aspect of the architecture that in the Infosys EdgeVerve product suite brings. In terms of speed, as I mentioned, the integrated device monitoring really helps you to identify the processes, the candidate processes for automation very quickly, without any manual intervention and non-invasively, and therefore gives you that pipeline of automation candidates quickly. And we focus on reuse. In terms of the risk of or the engagement model itself, we look at single accountability and flexibility of the whole commercial model, but also it's a long-standing investment, a relationship and an investment from Infosys. So it's not it's not something that we are building to sell off in the next 1 year. This is something that we are focused on for the coming years, and it's something that we will continue to invest in. And in terms of results, I think we have seen really some fantastic results with our customers in terms of the percentage of automation, the percentage of savings, but also the ability to scale out to an enterprise-wide program and make sure an enterprise-wide program of RPA can be successful. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to cover. Frank, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate that. I know we covered a lot in a short amount of time. So for those of you in attendance, if you have questions and you haven't submitted them, now's the time. We do have a good many, and I'll do my best to cover a few or as many as I can with the allocated time here. But here's an interesting question that caught my attention, and that had to do just with the role of HR. Knowing that there's people involved, a lot of this has to do with labor, impact on existing labor, and the question had to do with HR's role in this, either on the front end or for ongoing governance. And I'll ask you, Robin. Just I'm curious. Have you seen this play out within your client base? What role do you see for HR with regard to this with this journey, if you will?
Yeah, so I think HR is a very integral part of the whole RPA strategy. That when it is deployed, there are multiple aspects to it. So one is who are being impacted, what is the retraining or training that is required for those being impacted. There is also aspects around sort of pseudo HR legal as to what happens when processes fail or processes do not go according to what is planned, and how do you fall back onto the humans? How do you bring back the human FTE into the equation when there are fallouts or robots are failing, right? So we have seen the HR involvement in programs which are large-scale enterprise-wide programs, especially around the communication of what is RPA, the retraining and rescaling of the folks involved or affected by the RPA.
All right, super. Another question here has to do with domain on where the financial service industry compare. Okay, so this question has to do with financial services as compared to other industries. And from my experience, hopefully yours as well, Sarah, a good bulk of this activity seemed to be sparked and driven through kind of the banking and financial services space. So curious if what similarities or differences do you see, are you observing, and maybe even any recommendations as to what non-BFS organizations should do as opposed to maybe a typical bank?
In terms of, do you mean in terms of what they automate?
Yeah, really, just how they approach this. So one thing I could share is just from a recent meeting I had with a major bank that we would all know, the bulk of the discussion was around regulatory, right?
Yeah.
So there were a lot of restrictions there, which may not be the case if you're in a non-regulated industry. Any other thoughts or any other recommendations for banking, non-banking versus a banking customer?
Sure. Yes. Well, I think really the key is large volume transactional processes. As we see, for example, telco sector, they're doing a lot of this, and basically, looking at where the problem areas are in terms of processes and where the backlogs are and what needs to be addressed, and think about automation, RPA, and combination maybe with AI to resolving those issues. And actually, once you get started, you can also then look at opportunities for innovation and getting ahead of competition, literally leading to more capacity, better customer service. So all of these, it's all about any kind of large volume transactional processes, making them more efficient. And that applies across the sectors, all sectors. Finance and accounting, is the third most automated area. So many organizations have shared service centers, but, it's not unusual to have to do the same thing 5 times over, 6, 7, 10 times over, because different parts of the organization have different ERP systems. And so, being able to automate those and get rid of the duplicated manual effort can really make a step change in efficiency.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And I'm curious, Robin, if you think back to the polling question where vertical expertise was a key driver for vendor selection, Are you seeing that as well as you engage with your clients? And are there any other areas beyond the banking and financial services where you're seeing significant amount of momentum right now?
Yes, yes, Frank. So vertical expertise is a key part of the selection process, as Sarah mentioned and identified by the poll. And in terms of the other verticals that are adopting RPA, I think insurance is adopting it in a big way. We have manufacturing and telecom companies also really adopting RPA. So I don't think it's a phenomenon that's just restricted to the financial services segment, and many of the other segments are also really playing an active part in this. But as Sarah mentioned, large transactional volumes, compliance, quality are the key areas where it really makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, you had a couple of interesting slides with regard to potential engagement models. So I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Is there one that you prefer, or is that one that you feel is optimal?
I don't think, honestly, there is a particularly wrong or right answer. I think it's what the situation is in the organization, what they need to do, and to scale up. So I think any one of those models could work. And we're seeing organizations deploy, have deployments in all those types of models. I think the key is, what works for your organization, and don't be afraid of trying different models. It is a new area, and you learn by doing. The more you do, the more you learn, and the more you can then, having done some for yourself, you can then decide what to do next. So having tried one model, you might then try to scale up by using some of those combinations, those patterns that I mentioned in my on my slide.
Mm-hmm. And a related question: do you see? Well, I don't want to lead the witness, but let me try it this way. There are several who believe that the role of the traditional service provider will change, or maybe will need to reinvent itself as a result of some of these new options. Right? There's different places you can go for different things in this new world order. Do you agree, or how do you see that playing out?
Yes, I think the role of service providers is changing, and the ones to adopt, take on the challenge and change with it, the earliest they're going to be really getting a foothold in the market. The biggest challenge for traditional service providers is the legacy contracts that they have, and being able to convert those into to the new model and continue to add value and have a reasonable pricing to go with it.
Absolutely. And we were discussing before HR. I'm curious, Robin, you think about roles in the organization. This is one of the ongoing debates, which is who should be driving this? Should IT be driving this because it's about technology? Should a functional head be driving this? Sarah referred to a lot of back office finance related work. Should that process owner be driving it? Should HR be driving it? Because at the end of the day, many would argue that it's about a kind of a revisit to the labor model. Where do you think, at the risk of getting one or two of your prospects mad at you here who might be listening, where do you think this should be anchored in the organization?
Yeah, so I think I did cover it briefly, but from what I see and what has worked well is a cross-functional team. Really, this has to be a business and IT coming together because it is a transformation program. It does affect both parties, and really it affects the whole entire business, right? And so therefore IT control and governance has to be there, while business is demanding more agility in terms of how the automation is delivered, how the priorities are set, etc. So I'll take the middle path here, and what I've seen really working is a cross-functional team, and so that's what I would promote.
Okay, no, that's fine. Another question relates to just more on the front end of this, negotiating. One of the biggest, maybe, I don't know if complaint is too strong a word, but there's a lot of anxiety in the marketplace now, knowing that pricing models are really all over the map, right? So, the Wild West is a phrase that's used. Are you seeing any? What are you seeing out there, and what are your thoughts? What would you share with those listening here as to, how do you know if you're getting a good deal if nobody can even agree on what a good price is?
Well, I think that's the natural evolution of the market, and it will take time for it to settle and for the sort of the right balance to be found. So I think that's quite natural, but I can tell you that the rumors of the death of input pricing have been highly exaggerated. It's still the main model that is used. And what I do find is that there are some disruptors who are coming in with totally outcome-based pricing models, and they will, bit by bit, they will push the market towards that. So we're seeing an uptick in demand for that kind of model. So outcome and output pricing is still relatively represents a small part of the market. But with this model, with this automation and transaction-based pricing makes huge sense, and I think that's the way it will head. And initially, there may be winners who come in and say we will reduce headcount by so many and those kind of things. But at the end of the day, it's also it's not just about reducing manual processes. It's also about increasing quality, throughput, all those other aspects that matter to organizations.
No, it makes total sense. Robert, what are you seeing when you and your team get in there and negotiate? Have you come to some sort of a framework that works, or is there just as much anxiety on the sell side?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of models and untested models and that we are seeing. Our response to that is we are approaching the market with flexibility. Right, we understand that each client has different needs and operates in a different way, so we are providing the flexibility. And more importantly, we are providing the transparency because we believe we are with it in the client for the long run, and therefore a model that sort of doesn't make sense to the client while it may benefit you at the start, but really is not a good way to continue a relationship with the customers. So flexibility and transparency are the two things that we are really, promoting as part of EdgeVerve and Infosys.
Okay. No, thank you so much. So with a few minutes remaining, let me see if I could sneak two more in, one for each of you. So Robert, for you, why do you see, RDA, desktop automation, if you will, as important capability today?
Yeah. So I think, there will always be processes for the near future that are dependent on humans, and the front end, the contact centers are classic examples of that, and therefore robotic desktop automation is important. The other aspect why I believe it's important is that a lot of our large clients are asking what happens when robots fail, and for whatever reason, right? How does my reduced FTE really pick up those transactions and do a good job of it? And really, robotic desktop automation enables the FTE to perform those transactions which have either through fallouts or through robot failures, gives them the efficiency and the speed to even do those transactions in such cases. For those two reasons, I really believe that robotic desktop automation is an important capability.
Okay, fair enough, I agree. And then just final question, Sarah, how do you see RPA and AI working together? We get asked this question a lot. Especially as the dialogue shifts beyond RPA solely, right? No shortage of interest in AI. So how do you see the synergies playing out together?
Yes, absolutely. I think AI will sort of come into automation, business process and IT automation in different ways. I think, first of all, I'm seeing AI come into the technology itself. So AI actually enhancing the way that RPA works, and for example, computer vision. So the RPA tools, as a result of that, will pick up what's on screen much more reliably than they do today. So we see the actual solution improving as a result of AI. The second way is that it will extend the scope of what can be automated. So organizations use it. I think maybe AI is a bit of a grand name for smart document processing. So they get, the process, they can automate it end to end. So from the intake of the documents that come in at the beginning of a process through the logical sort of rules-based process, go out at the end of the process to maybe put in terms of letters or text messages or email to customers. So this is where they work very synergistically, very well together, often orchestrated through other tools or workflow, etc. So they can complement each other in that sense. And then there is, I think in future, we'll also see RPA tools actually become easier to use through AI. So I'm really encouraging technology vendors to add in new interfaces to their tools, such as voice recognition. So I would like, as the operator in an operations room, to be able to talk to my robot. I want to find out how it's doing, what's gone wrong, and I want it to be able to talk back to me rather than having this kind of command line interfaces. So I think we'll see the usability also improve.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're right on time here, wrapping up. I was reminded by Molly to make sure that, first off, wanted to thank you both for participating and preparing and putting in the time before and during this webinar. Thank you, Robin, and thank you so much, Sarah. Appreciate this, very helpful. If those of you here in attendance would like to follow up with any particular questions, you're welcome to, whether it be myself or Robin or Sarah. Our emails and contact information will be on the follow-up email. Also a reminder for those of you who have not already yet considered or have not registered for our year-end Automation Innovation Conference. We'll be covering these topics and more. We'll be both in New York and London in December. If you're on the mailing list for this webinar, you will be on the mailing list for the AI conference. They sell out pretty much every year. At least last year, New York did sell out a month or so before, and London did not sell out, but we had a significant number of people there. I think we had 200 or more in New York. My prediction is we'll sell out both this year, just based on the following and the growth in the industry. So if you're interested, we'd love to see you there. Again, thank you all. Have a great day, and good luck with your future automating adventures. Have a great day.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.